We're honored to have you here as always, and this is an exciting time in Utah with the legislature in session and all the things that we do in these 45 days. We're into our second week. We've been here for 10 or 11 days. I'm appreciative of the progress that's being made. I think our legislators are taking their jobs very seriously, trying to get a lot of work done and produce good outcomes. My three top issues, as you all know, have to do with education funding, making sure we raise the bar when it comes to educational outcomes, our goal of 66 by 2020, trying to transition to a top 10 state in our outcomes, improve our graduation rates, our attendance to colleges, universities, and community college and applied technology colleges, improving our scores, etc. So that's something I think we'll find, success in overall as we go through this session. My issues regarding transportation. As the third or fourth fastest growing state in America today, our infrastructure needs are acute and growing over time. And so I appreciate the fact that I hear discussion being addressed on the long-term transportation funding area, and some serious discussion and negotiations going on in that regard, which I applaud and appreciate. Last but not least, of course, is the Healthy Utah. Again, a common sense alternative to Medicaid expansion. And I see good discussion going on in both the House and the Senate in that regard. I think some of questions are being raised that are legitimate. I think answers are being found and forthcoming. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we can eventually come together on doing something that makes sense to the taxpayers of Utah and helps those who are most vulnerable in our society with some health care opportunities. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on this issue or these issues or any other issues.
Healthy Utah, we'll start there, I guess. The House still seems resistant. There's a bill out from Senator Christensen that just covers the medically frail. There's a lot of resistance at this point to going beyond 100% of poverty. Do you believe that's a sell you can make? And if they do go with medically frail, is that acceptable to you?
Well, let me just answer it this way. I think as the legislature has the opportunity to understand all the ramifications of the situation we find ourselves in today based on the law of the land, that there's only so many things you can do that make any sense. As you've heard me say before, we didn't necessarily support the Affordable Care Act. The Supreme Court has said Medicaid expansion is voluntary, but the tax is mandatory. So we have to pay the money, whether we like it or not. That's just the reality of the laws of the land. And in Utah's case, we're going to be sending about $800 million per year back to Washington, D.C. And that doesn't seem like a good thing to do. Obama took it from us. I want it back. It's that simple. And we can put it into a program that I believe is better than Medicaid expansion, called Healthy Utah. It addresses other issues that of human need, like a job, helping you to get work, the dignity of work, make yourself so that you can support yourself and not have to have government assistance. Those are all good things. And providing health care and providing workfare ought not to be mutually exclusive ideas. So the bottom line is it will cost us approximately $236 million total over the next 6 years to access $3.2 billion of our money that will be brought back to the state of Utah to be invested here in the private sector as part of our economy, providing health care coverage with more selection, more choice, more options than you would find under a Medicaid expansion program. So I think that's a really good thing. $236 million, we get back $3.2 billion. The alternative we have on the table right now is, in fact, the medically frail. Well, over that same period of time, if we just do the medically frail, we'll, in fact, expend about $200 million. So almost the same amount of money. We'll draw down, so we're going to draw down still some federal money, again, which is okay. It's our money. We want it back. But we'll only draw down about $611 million. So you can compare and say, well, let's see, for basically the same cost out of our Utah taxpayers, one program gets back $600 million, the other program gets back $3.2 billion. You do the math. Which one seems to be the most sensible to you? And we help, instead of only about 15,000 of the medically frail in our community, which is certainly worthwhile of helping, we help 146,000 people in the state of Utah. So again, I think the contrast is stark. I know there are questions about revenue stream. Where does the money come from that we're addressing? And we're working with our legislature to show how that can come without really minimal disruption of any other programs we're doing out there. And the ability for us to, in fact, if the federal government somehow decides not to keep the match of 90-10, then we have a process where, in fact, people who have signed up will understand that if that's the case, then this program could be modified or eliminated. I would hope the federal government would do that. I don't expect that they would do that. But we can put some triggers in place so that we can protect some kind of runaway program that we ultimately in the long term could not afford to do. So I think we can answer the questions that people have out there. I'm going to be working with the Senate and the House to see if we can't resolve some of those differences and get to a place where we can all feel like this Healthy Utah program really will work for our taxpayers and our people that need some help.
Another thing we hear from House leadership, in addition to the things you pointed out, is concerns over uncertainty with pending lawsuits that could, for example, do away with the subsidies that people are receiving, and that's one of their issues with going with Healthy Utah as well. So what's your comment and your pitch on the uncertainties that surround the ACA in general as far as moving forward?
Well, one, there's a lot of uncertainty in life. I mean, we can speculate about, well, what if this, or what if that, or what if this, and we should not allow that to stymie us for doing something. If something indeed does happen down the road, we can in fact react to that. We've always been good at adapting to changes that take place out of Washington, D.C. That should not scare us into not going forward. We live on a earthquake fault, and who knows, we may have a problem down the road with earthquakes. But it doesn't stop us from moving ahead and progressing and doing what we can as long as we can. We also are in a unique position. We have our own exchange. So we have a state exchange. It's called Avenue H. So if, in fact, premium assistance are taken away, we actually have a mechanism to keep it. It's probably 50-50 one way or the other, but whatever the courts tell us, we'll react to and we'll adjust to. But we should not be inhibited in moving forward with a good program because they're taking the money from us now, and we want it back.
So Avenue H could be open up to individuals?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. It doesn't mean that it has to go to the individual mandate. It's right now for small business. But we do have an exchange. There is a mechanism for us, in fact, to have a state exchange. Again, it's speculation. We don't know. I mean, I'll just harken back to the last court case we did on the Affordable Care Act. I thought, I was confident, I was positive we'd win in court that it was unconstitutional. And it was because we thought it was a violation of the Constitution on the Commerce Clause. And guess what? It was upheld. That part of our accusation was the fact the Supreme Court said, yeah, it is a violation. We can't make people buy something. But they also changed the argument, the Obama administration, to this is not a penalty, it's a tax. And so they upheld, with John Roberts making the final decision, that it's a constitutional program because of the taxing authority of the country, of the federal government. So, I mean, who knows? I think a lot of us were surprised it was upheld to be constitutional because of a different argument that had not been proposed before. So who knows what's going to happen with this court case. Let's not speculate. Let's just move ahead and do the right thing today.
Governor, you clearly prefer the Healthy Utah proposal, but would you veto something other than that, the medically frail proposal?
We're not even to the point of talking vetoes. This is certainly not something. We want to find a solution. I've got a proposal out there that we've spent nearly 18 months in developing. We've sliced and diced it about any way that you can. We've looked at different options out there under the law. We've got maximum flexibility. There's not a state in America that's got the flexibility that we've got. It's not perfect. It's not everything we want. But as I said in my State of the State, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. This is a good proposal. If there's something better out there, I want to hear it. Let's talk about it. Doing nothing is not an option. And medically frail is certainly, some people have said it's better than nothing, but it's not a lot better. It's 15,000 people compared to the 146,000 that we have out there, and it doesn't address a lot of the needs of those people. So again, we're apart. The question is, can we come together? I think we can.
There are a number of proposals out there about school board governance after the state's method of selecting school board candidates was struck down. Which one do you favor? Where are you on that?
I haven't seen all of the proposals. There's all the way from partisan elections to more government or governor involvement in the selection process, similar to a board of regents, how I do higher education. I think they all have merit, and there needs to be a robust discussion. The system we have in place today, which actually this past session brought really good people to be put on the ballot. It was one of the better groups of people that have ever been forwarded to me. And so it's kind of a difficult thing to understand. It's a little convoluted in its process that the public doesn't probably appreciate. So having a more simplified version is probably smart. Judge Wattops, with his decision, has certainly said you're going to have to change it one way or the other. So I expect we'll have healthy discussion on it. I do like the Board of Regents approach. Most states around the country do have kind of a governor appointment based on certain criteria of who they can choose from with Senate confirmation. I think that's a good approach.
You, in the State of the State, sort of following the LDS Church's statement, said that you think that religious liberties need to be paired with non-discrimination. Have you given any thought to, and you said you think the balance can be struck between those two, have you given any thought to what that balance looks like? What specific religious liberties do you feel like need to be protected?
Well, again, that's part of the discussion, because the anti-discrimination and religious liberties do kind of bump up against each other. We see that around the country, and we have people here in the state of Utah that have been targeted because they had a different point of view when it came to same-sex marriage. And not only have they been targeted by people just using their First Amendment rights of free speech, but they've been targeted in their workplace. And some have, in fact, been threatened and lost their job or seniority. So the discrimination occurs on both sides of this issue. And so we need to find the middle ground. I agree with the comments that have been made that we're probably going to have both sides do some compromise, and both sides will probably not get everything that they want. But I think we've got good people in the legislature that are addressing this issue, and we're finding where there's conflict, but we're also finding where there's opportunities to come together. And I do believe that you can't have one without the other. I think if we're going to get this through, it needs to be a joint effort so that both sides of this issue are, in fact, protected. And I think if we can do it, one, I think it'll be good for us as a state to resolve the issue. And two, I think it can be a model for other states around the country of how we can come together and resolve what is a very emotional issue on all sides that needs some kind of resolution.
Governor, who have you heard about who's lost their job because of this?
I'm not at liberty to say right now. I think that'll come up in the testimonies that are going to be given as we go through this process. Anecdotal stories are coming in. I don't like to create legislation by anecdote, but it certainly gives us some reasons to analyze and say, what are the consequences of this law? What are the unintended as well as intended consequences of a religious liberties law coupled with anti-discrimination? Again, we think of the anti-discrimination mostly being on the side of the gay community, but there are some that have been discriminated on the other side that's inappropriate. So there are legitimate grievances on both sides of the issue, and so we're going to try to thread the needle here and bring people together and find that common ground that people have talked about for the last few years.
Did they contact your office to work on this issue? Were they just so concerned, or did somebody else bring this to your
I've had others bring it to my attention, and it's being analyzed and investigated, and it'll come out at the appropriate time. But again, I don't want to create a law based on one incident, but I do want to understand the principles that are out there, that we need to create good law for not only individuals that have maybe been discriminated against, but just make sure that we have a good parameters to guide us in the future so that we don't have problems in the future. Part of the reason having a law is so we don't have problems in the future. So it's not just resolving problems in the past, but making sure we have a pathway going forward that resolves us having these kinds of conflicts.
So is this anecdotal, or have you been able to actually verify that someone has lost their job for speaking out against same-sex marriage?
It's been verified.
Would that not be covered under the existing discrimination laws?
Might be. That's part of the legal analysis. That's part of this is why we're being careful. I expect this will be something that will be worked on in a collaborative way with all sides of the issue. People want to weigh in and give their points of view and issue their concerns, and that's how you make law. And we'll analyze all that. We'll have our legal experts tell us what the law means and what the consequences will be, and we'll craft something that I believe will be acceptable to both sides of the issue.
You have supported the non-discrimination standpoint on a municipal level in the past, and you have said that you thought it could potentially be handled that way, but do you think it's time now for a statewide anti-discrimination?
You know, in light of what's happened with the courts, I'm a big believer that these kinds of issues should be resolved legislatively. That's how the people's will is voiced. And if mores have changed, attitudes have changed, whatever causes people to have a different perspective, they should be making those changes through their elected representatives. And the courts become divisive. We've seen that with the abortion issue. We see it with the same-sex and the gay marriage issue. So having it done legislatively, I think, is a much better way to do it. We are at that point, I think, where we can have that discussion. I have applauded the efforts of cities. We have about 20 of them that have come up with their own ordinances of anti-discrimination. I'm pleased to hear that there's really, in those 20 cities, there's never been any complaint brought forward of discrimination. So that's encouraging. Either the ordinances are working, or we're better people than maybe sometimes we think we are when it comes to discrimination. But that being the case, you know, maybe it's time. It appears to be that now would be a good time to look at a statewide ordinance. And I would think if we do that, we probably ought to consider repealing the ordinances in the existing cities so that we have a uniform approach across the state.
Governor, I want to ask you about the bill. It hasn't been made public yet, but Representative Paul Ray wants to make those convicted of child sex trafficking eligible for the death penalty. I want to ask you about your thoughts on that, but it also seems like it will pretty clearly be unconstitutional and conflict with a Supreme Court ruling and could very likely have a constitutional note on it. I just wanted to get your broader policy for when bills arrive on your desk with those notes.
Well, it's hard for me to comment on bills that haven't been, prepared, and there's concepts out there that you can talk about in broad terms. But the devil is in the details, and so I wouldn't want to comment on Representative Ray's bill until I see the bill and see what it means. I know that child trafficking and it is, for most of us, just what's so heinous we can't even hardly comprehend it. But whether that rises to the level of capital punishment, capital punishment is controversial in itself for first-degree murder. So I just would want to see the bill before I make any comment on that.
More broadly, if bills arrive on your desk with a constitutional note on them, how does that factor into your decision?
Well, we try to make it a practice not to pass unconstitutional bills. I know that there are some that come with a note, fiscal notes, that makes us pause, say, can we afford it? It's a good program, but can we afford it? So fiscal notes gives us direction and helps us understand whether it's something we can support now or maybe need to push it off to some time later. Constitutional notes help us also, and we have difference of opinion sometimes on what the constitutional notes are or do, or if they in fact are something that would cause us to not move forward. But certainly I look at the constitutional notes, and I, at least in my recollection, I don't think I've signed any bills that I don't think are constitutional.
You have time for one more.
You're making public tomorrow the
Well, I don't want to scoop what we're going to do tomorrow, so show up. I can tell you, it's pretty simple. I mean, the intent here was based on really this. I'm concerned about the argument back and forth from good people on both sides of this issue, for Common Core, anti-Common Core. But the overarching issue there is the federal overreach. I know, Brian, that you've got my State of the State on your nightstand at night. You probably read it and study it and have got it redlined. But if you remember, one of the things I have a serious concern about, which is not unique to Republican governors or me only, but Democrats too, and that is this constant federal overreach into the domains of the state. We all ought to be concerned about it. And certainly that's part of this education conundrum we're involved with here today. I'll just give you one interesting note. And you all know this, James Madison, again, in the Federalist 45, it's on your other nightstand that you study, said in trying to argue why the Constitution should be adopted, said, don't fear this new centralized government. The states will always have superiority. The federal government the powers in this are definite and few. And he goes on to talk about, whether it be commerce, whether it be national defense, those kind of things we think of the federal government to have a priority on. And then he said, with the states, the responsibilities and powers given to the states are numerous and undefined. So most of the responsibility for governing and the programs and issues out there are given to the states, not to the federal government. So I went here just a couple of weeks ago and thought, I ought to test that and see what's happened. So I had our Office of Management and Budget go back and calculate all the state budgets, all 50 of our states, of these great United States of America, and total up their budgets. What is the combined budget of all the 50 states? Guess what it was? $1.7 trillion. Now, you all noted here just the other day, the president unveiled his new budget proposal, which is $3.99 trillion. So let's just say $4 trillion. So $1.7 trillion compared to $4 trillion, where the government was supposed to be limited in its powers and definite in what they could do, everything else left to the states. Somewhere along the line, we've got this sucker upside down. Well, education is one of those concerns that are out there, but it could be a lot of other areas where the federal government is encroaching into the responsibility of the state. Again, I appreciate President Obama saying, let's give 2 years of free education to our community colleges, to our young people, and patterned it after my friend Bill Haslam's approach in Tennessee. I've talked to Bill about his program. It sounds like a good program. It costs him about $500 a student, how it's worked out there. They get it from a lottery. That's where the money comes from in Tennessee. But I don't need to have the federal government to tell me how to do our education in Utah. If I think that's a great program in Tennessee, I'll copy it. I'll maybe modify it. I don't have a lottery. I've got to find another way to fund it. We already are giving scholarships and other things to help people do the same thing that what they're doing in Tennessee. But why do we have a president getting up and say, we're going to somehow mandate to you how you're going to handle your education program within your state? And by the way, we can't afford it anyway. I mean, we're running an $18 trillion debt and rising each and every year. It just doesn't make any sense. So when I go tomorrow and talk about our education, that's going to be the overarching issue. Is the federal government getting in our way and taking away our rights to educate our own kids in our own way? I hope the answer is going to be no. I haven't heard the report, so I'm going to listen. We'll have reports that will talk about the legal entanglement. We'll talk about the standards, the curriculum, access to textbooks and who acquires those, and data collection and testing. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we're in control as the state of Utah in all of those areas. If we're not, we need to fix it. If we are, hallelujah. That's good news for all of us. So show up. We'll see what the report comes.